The Sims is in some ways one of the greatest missed opportunities in video game history. Not the greatest, there's a couple of ones that really do kinda knock it out of the park in terms of lost opportunity. One of them is also Moxie's game, Spore of course, but Sims is among one of them. And yet it's still one of the best selling video games ever made, one of the most popular, one of the games that just kills it. It's got an audience that covers all demographics, it's more profitable than chocolate covered meth cigarettes, and it's the game we're gonna talk about today on this episode of Gaming History. For those unfamiliar with what The Sims is, it's part architectural design game where you build your own house and you decorate it. It's part life simulator where you have a character that is independent, or at least can act independent of your actions based on its own needs, its own wants, its own traits. The legend goes that this game was initially just meant to be an architectural design game where you would build a house, some characters would come in, they would say, oh yeah, this is good, here's a rating, and then you'd go on to your next house. Of course, that's not entirely true. Will Wright was working on a game like The Sims, well basically The Sims, since 1991, but none of the versions up until the 2001 proved to be good enough. The legend also says that this game was initially meant as sort of criticism, a parody at the consumerist nature of American culture, because your characters would define their happiness, their self-worth even, based on the stuff they owned. If they owned a really crappy furniture set, they wouldn't be all that happy. If you bought them a grand piano, well baby, they were very happy. And the more shiny new stuff they had, the happier they were. If they couldn't afford stuff, they would sometimes get depressed, they wouldn't go to their job, they'd get fired, then they'd not have any money to buy stuff, and would eventually die because they were probably eaten by all the flies swarming around their filthy homes. Or at least that's how the legend goes. I can't actually verify that The Sims was meant to be a criticism of consumerism, because if it truly was, oh boy did this backfire badly. We're talking about a game series that had DLC, well for one, it had 2 DLC packs a year. The first game had 2 DLC packs a year, and its sequels had various tie-in DLC with stuff like Katy Perry for some reason and IKEA furniture. So again, if this was meant to be a criticism, it sort of forgot along the way, sort of like hipsters like something ironically, then they forget about the ironic part and then they just like it, and that's how we get very horrible things in the market, especially in music and film and wardrobe and food and probably presidents. But regardless of that, why would I say that this game is a wasted opportunity? Well, first let's take a look at what The Sims offered you. You could either get a home that was already built in your neighborhood or built one from the ground up exactly to your specification. You could build it in any way you wanted to. You couldn't make curved walls because the game was on a grid basis back then, but you could build whatever kind of house you wanted to. You could decorate the rooms the way you wanted. You could make it feel like your dream home. You could basically just design your future home in this game. You could also make a 2-story house, sell the walls on the first floor, and then just have a floating house for some reason, but you could. And in that house, you would have your Sims. 1 character, 2 characters, a whole family. They would interact, they would play together, they would eat together, they would accidentally set themselves on fire while cooking because they have a very low cooking skill and the apparatus for cooking wasn't actually up to snuff. And your job as the player was basically to watch over these creatures, these entities. You could exert control directly over them, you could disable their free will and just have them be your puppets, but that really wasn't all that fun in the long term. You would enable their free will and just see how they would do. Well, occasionally you would just tell them to stop eating in the bathroom. They have table and the kitchen for that. They should also really try and get their skills up, because they had skills, they had mechanics, they had cooking, they had professional skills that would let them get better jobs. And when they did get a job, they would basically leave the house for half a day, at which point nothing happened. That in some way is a missed opportunity in the game, because you didn't have anything to do for half the day, so you just fast forward through it. You couldn't do anything at the job, you couldn't interact with people there, you couldn't do anything. But that's not the thing I'm referring to, the big missed opportunity of the game. Now, that came in the form of the relationships. Yes, you could form relationships with other Sims, you could get them to form families, to form relationships, to form a sort of bond or an animosity. They would behave sort of like human beings would, but the system was just not deep enough. For you see, this series really did focus a lot on selling tie-in DLC for gods know whatever other product, and didn't really try and delve deeply into humanity's connection to itself, into the relationships between humans, how they evolve, how they are constructed, how they function, how they work. It kept a more upbeat, comedic style where you would compliment someone 5 times and then you'd be married, and never delved too deeply, too truly into human nature. The 4th one does do a bit of it, from what I've been told and from what I saw in the trailers, but I can't really say how much because I haven't played it. But the ones I have played, they didn't do a good job of it. They mimed human interaction. They displayed the simulacra of social relations. They are simplistic, they are shallow, and they do not represent the complexity of humanity, which, coming from a company that made stuff like Sim Earth, which simulated Earth, and even Spore, and Sim City even, heck, Sim Tower was amazing, it kind of feels like they could have done more. Well, not in the first one, sure, it was made way back then with limited technology, but the later ones, they were still as shallow, they were still as vapid, they were still as consumer-driven things made to be giant doll houses in which you would make characters based on the people you would have wanted in your life, but never had the nerve to tell them that you loved them. See, I can understand the game quite well. I can see its value as a therapeutical tool. I can see its enjoyment factor as just a dollhouse game. I understand why it is so popular, but I can't help but being disappointed that it plateaued so quickly. It just stopped innovating. Sure, it's fun, it's funny, and it's incredibly satisfying to be a sadistic bastard that locks your Sims up in a small closet and watches them die or make them swim endlessly because you took out the stairs to the pool and they hadn't figured out how to climb out back then, so they die. There's lots of ways you can torture them, lots of ways you can exert your anger at people. Again, a very useful therapeutical tool, but it could have been so much more. And being an Electronic Arts game, it never will be. I don't believe you can actually buy The Sims, the first one, from anywhere, but you can pretty much get every other game in the series on Origin. I think one of them is on Steam maybe, and there was a medieval one that tried to give you a bit more gameplay. Strangely enough, that wasn't the one that got the Game of Thrones DLC. They put that in Sims 3, and there was Sims Online for a while. It got closed down after it became EA Land, and EA closed it. If you haven't played The Sims, I really encourage you to give it a try. I believe there's an actual trial, like a playable trial for the 4th one on Origin. It's a different experience compared to most other games. It's a life simulator with its own quirks. Or if you're in it for the woohoo, you could probably just get the singles, which is a series of games made particularly to fill that niche. Goodbye.